Good afternoon. My name is Yogi Pillay. I lead the enterprise deployment engineering team over at OpenAI. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I've already had so many exciting conversations over lunch. The sessions this morning were amazing, but I think one of the most insightful things I've learned so far is just how many AI puns Pratt knows. He had airline intelligence, he had, just so many. It was very well done. Kudos. Awesome. So this may come as a surprise to some of you, but my plan for today is to speak about agents. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about the shift that we're seeing from AI assistants to agent teams, and share a point of view and a perspective as far as how we see the next operating model for enterprise work evolve. Our plan for today is we'll start by sharing some themes and some trends that we're seeing across the industry. From there, we'll dive into some of the surface areas that you can really leverage to build agents. We'll go really deep into some of the things that you need to consider, the trade-offs that we need to go think through as we're taking these systems into production, and then move into cover a couple demos as well along the way. So with that, the curve that we're seeing in front of us should not be a surprise to anyone in the room. We're all living this every single day. The capability curve has accelerated dramatically, and major model releases that used to take months to get into production are now taking just weeks to get there. With each wave, we're seeing stronger reasoning, richer modalities, and more useful tools being introduced on every release that we see move into production right now. So the advantage that we recommend to organizations is not waiting for the next model. Don't wait until that next release. Act now, build the systems now, turn the capabilities of today into production systems that organizations can use. Those gains will compound over time. So with intelligence no longer being the bottleneck that it used to be, what we're instead seeing is that this has now moved to deployment. The data, the tools, the identity, the permissions, auditability, durability, this is where enterprise value either shows up or gets stuck. When we think about the evolution that we're seeing across the ecosystem, I think of this in really 3 steps. We started off with chat, which made AI easy to access. We all became familiar with the technology through tools like ChatGPT. Responses allowed us to take that and add structure and tool calling and really elevate the level of work that we were capable of accomplishing with AI. And now what we're seeing is that agents add continuity. It takes what we're able to do, build on that by using things like memory, state. We give it an environment to do its work in, keep working over long time horizons, and that allows us to shift the outputs from just simple questions and answers to goals that we can drive over some long time horizons, which is a significant shift in how we can engage with the technology and with the outcomes that we can drive from the technology. When we think about an AI-powered company, it's not just one agent that's responding to every individual in the organization. Instead, it's a portfolio of agents that are matched to real jobs, to real outcomes that are driven at the individual level. Each is matched to support either employees, to run workflows, to maybe sit inside products. And the key is that they work with people, systems, and each other with clear boundaries that we define when we're setting up these agents. So if we think about a company as a portfolio of agents, the first question we get is how should we think about introducing these agents into the organization? And really what it boils down to is the work that needs to be done. What is it that we need to accomplish? What are we looking to drive forward with the agents? It really has nothing to do with the technology as we get started. What outcomes are we looking to drive? What does good look like? What examples represent real edge cases where we might fall short, and how do we account for those before we even start building these systems? What does our evaluation harness look like? Do we have good data to ensure that the systems we're putting into production can be accurately evaluated and assessed as we move it from POC to production? From there, we decide what context we need to give these agents. What tools does it need to have access to do the jobs that it needs to do? We can leverage memories and skills to help build more robust agents that are able to do more over long time horizons. And we also need to be really mindful about where we explicitly want to draw the boundaries for what work an agent should not do. Where should an agent stop and maybe ask for approvals? And where do we need audibility? And observability should be across the entire system from the get-go. A question that I get asked often when we start thinking about how to pull in the models and how to start building these systems is, where does fine-tuning fit into this process? And really what we're seeing is that if you have a good general purpose model with the right context, a durable harness, which we'll talk more about today, this gets us much further than jumping directly into fine-tuning. Fine-tuning is absolutely useful, but it's only required for specific roles, and that should come only after the evals show us a gap in the performance, not as the first move. So with that, as I mentioned, the model absolutely matters. It is still the brain of what is being orchestrated in the systems that we're building. But what we're finding as another theme and trend is that the harness is becoming more and more important. And the harness is really the superpower that gives the model a place to work. It gives it access to files, to tools, automation, code execution, and memories over short, medium, and long time horizons. This is really what takes intelligence and turns it into something that can gather context, that can take action, and do so in a repeatably reliable way, which is critically important for enterprises as we get into production. Now, to become a true teammate, 4 things really matter. First and foremost, context management, planning, execution, and durability of the system. So the system has to remember the decisions that it's making, learn from those decisions. It needs to be able to adapt as it learns through each try that it goes through. It needs access to the appropriate tools, the appropriate data, and most importantly, especially for long horizon tasks, it needs to be able to survive approvals, retries, failures, all without starting over from scratch. I think this is a fundamental shift that takes us from assistance, where your workflow ends when your conversation ends, to something that is longer running and that can keep going even after the initial session is over. So given how important the harness is, this creates a practical choice for what type of harness we want to use and how we bring this into the organization. And there's really 2 paths that we can take here. We can use a managed harness, which provides the value and the benefit of a faster path to production. It allows us a lot more out-of-the-box capabilities like compaction, multi-agent parallel workloads, code execution, and we'll talk more about some of those values in a moment. Or you can build your own harness, which gives you full control, but it's a little slower and it's a bit more expensive to maintain. The choice here really boils down to the use case. There's some, for example, compliant use cases in healthcare or maybe financial services or even in retail, where having control of the harness is more important than speed and agility, in which case that's the direction we would likely want to go down. But I would say for a majority of use cases, leveraging a managed harness is what's going to get you to production faster and will allow us to create a more resilient system over time. When we think about the options that OpenAI provides in helping organizations build and leverage agents, there's really a spectrum that you have the ability to use. So Codex is our personal agent for work. I use Codex every day. It's effectively my chief of staff that organizes my day for me. It automatically drafts Slack messages. It responds to a lot of LinkedIn messages at this point. So it works very autonomously and without a lot of interaction and engagement from me. If we build on top of this, we then have our workspace agents, which allows you to take sort of that individual intelligence and share it with teams so that now you're pulling in agents to be a partner in the goals that we're trying to accomplish in our work. It's primarily designed for business and more non-technical users, and we'll take a look at what that interface looks like today as well. And then, as your product experience becomes more complex, as you have more requirements, then we have our Agents SDK, which allows you to build very custom workflows, but provides you the harness to embed those workflows in the surface areas that you choose to. So we'll walk through each of these surface areas, talk through some of the values and what the boundaries are, and then move on through to some examples. So let's start with Codex. The key idea with Codex is to delegate work to an agent. You give it a goal, you give it context, you allow it permissions to work on your laptop, for example, and it is able to inspect the environment, plan, use those tools, and keep working in the Codex harness until you achieve some result and that job is done. The key decision or the key benefit here is that rather than managing individual steps, you're now elevating your role in that interaction to managing the outcomes that Codex is driving versus each individual part of that goal that it's completing. Codex is not just a code editor. It is the place that work happens. We recently merged ChatGPT and Codex into a single application. It's where you have access to your IDE, to your coding apps, your CLI. You have access to the tools that you use for your work. And a big value in leveraging a harness like this is that as the model capabilities continue to change and continue to evolve, you don't need to recreate your workflow every single time. You have the harness that exists, and now as a new model is released, you can plug that into your existing harness and get started from there versus starting from scratch all over again. The next surface area we'll cover is workspace agents. These are business workflows that sit across people, knowledge, systems, and tools. You effectively describe a job that you want this agent to do. You connect it with the systems it needs access to and give it a repeatable responsibility inside that workspace, and then define what trigger starts this. So you can use it through many surface areas like ChatGPT or through Slack or through a custom environment, and that will work in either a scheduled or an automated way. Workspace agents can work in the background. They can pause for approvals when needed. They use tools, they follow skills, and they apply the same standard every time that you define when you're setting up the agent. This is really how you scale expertise within an organization, where you take what an SME is responsible for and what they're able to do, and you now take that knowledge and you make it accessible to anyone who needs it, and they can tag it in when they need that information or when they need access to that knowledge. This pattern works across functions, and like I mentioned, it's going to be function specific. So for example, sales can have a research and assistant to route leads. IT can check policies and open tickets. Marketing, finance, and analytics can pull context and produce review-ready work. Each agent has a role, they have tools, they have standards, and a definition for what job it is responsible for and what it needs to get done. But I think the real shift here happens when we start to elevate the unit of work that we ask these agents to do, and where we allow it to improve in how much automation is responsible for. So for example, rather than a sales agent simply coming in and routing a lead, maybe we ask that agent to capture the lead, send some email outreach, update the CRM, schedule the first meeting, and now, rather than a simple task, it's responsible for an entire workflow that we have set up in a governed way that we're auditing and we have observability throughout set up for. Similar thing with IT. Maybe rather than asking a simple question and answer, the IT agent is able to order inventory on your behalf, or it's able to create tickets in a third-party system. And so we elevate the work, reduce the burden on an individual, and we make it accessible throughout the organization. To make this a little real, let's go through a quick example of what this looks like in the UI. So as I mentioned, Workspace Agents is built for non-technical users. I have here a retail briefing agent that is set up to take in instructions, connected apps, governance, and identity. I can call skills, memory, and channels. And the Workspace Agent effectively does the job that I'm defining in the setup here and creates some output. In this case, I have it set up to send messages to Slack. I have a definition for what I want those messages to look like. I define where I want my teammates to be able to access this agent. It can be through ChatGPT. It can be through Microsoft Teams. It can be through Slack, any of the surface areas that you choose to. In this case, I'm also giving this agent additional skills. And what a skill is basically some SME knowledge to do something very specific. In this case, it has a retail agent handoff skill that takes disparate information, pulls it together from a lot of other places. So you can imagine a business user or an analyst using an agent like this to effectively help understand what's going on in their systems. I have very specific boundaries for what I want this agent to do from a safety perspective, and more importantly, what I don't want it to do. And in this case, I'm asking the agent not to make any changes to any data stores. It is simply just doing the analysis on my behalf. So here, I'm going to ask it to run a report for me. It will go through, it'll search all of the information it has access to. It will be able to connect to various systems, various tools, and put together a structured report in a format that I specified when I set up the agent. In the report that it generates for me, I have citations that I can click on so that it enables and sort of builds trust within the system. I know when I can track back to exactly where that data is coming from. And in this case, I'm going to pause here because we will pick this back up in another demo that we have set up. In production, you're likely going to want to have these things connected, but for the example, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to have it actually create a handoff that I can take from this agent and pop it into a custom agent that I have built that my organization uses. So that's what it has created for me here. We'll pause on this and we'll come back to it. Now, workspace agents covers a lot, but not every use case belongs in an interface like that. Sometimes you need deeper product experience, you need deeper orchestration, or deeper customizations that you want to control or own, as well as much tighter system integrations, and that's exactly where the Agents SDK comes in. With the Agents SDK, you define the tools, you define the model, the instructions, you effectively define what your product experience should look like, and what you get from it is a harness that sits within your product for reliable agentic work. It really gives you the best of both worlds, where you can organize and own the experience, while behind the scenes you have an agent running in the background that has access to a durable sandbox so it can do work and persist data. It has access to files, to dependencies, and can therefore run these long-running jobs. When we think about the anatomy of or components of the Agents SDK, it really boils down to four main things. First and foremost, the harness. Second, the manifest. Then we have the sandbox, and observability and reliability. The harness is where work runs. This is where the agent runs the loop to get the work done. The manifest defines what the agent can see and what it can use and what it has access to. The sandbox is where all of this orchestration happens, where it connects to our files, where it connects to the CLI to run code. And observability is what shows us what happened from a governance and security perspective. Without the SDK, teams can still build the same plumbing. They can create the agent loops, they can create the retries, own the authentication, but it's a lot more of a manual process. Agents SDK handles a lot of the common loops. It handles for you the durable execution, while your team can focus on the domain-specific sort of tools and knowledge that you want to bring into the system. The goal here is not to hide control. With Agents SDK, it's open source. You can use our models. You can use third-party models. You can run it in our environment with OpenAI managing it. You can run it in your cloud. You have a lot of control and options as far as how you own this. The main purpose in providing this is that it allows you to instead focus your engineering effort and concentrate on what differentiates you and what your business should be focusing on versus focusing on plumbing. So at a high level, the way that this orchestration will work is you'll have your product UI. Your product UI calls an API, which in turn will invoke the Agent SDK harness, which is the loop that does the work. The harness itself will orchestrate across all of the different tools it has access to. So whether it needs to call the responses API to call the LLM, whether it needs to call an MCP server to get additional context or data, it manages session, state, traces, and has access to a sandbox. We'll talk more about a sandbox in a moment because I think that's a key component as well. And again, the separation here is very useful. The experience that you're building remains yours. The product interface that you're building looks and feels like whatever it is you own, and this sits behind the scenes and orchestrates everything that's happening in the background. So a quick note on sandboxes, because this is a key decision that you have to think about and make as you're setting up these agents as well. Cloud sandboxes allow agents to gain access to a durable, governed place to work. Files and state can persist, we can store memories, multiple agents can share an environment in that if that's useful, and most importantly, it's not tied to a device. We've all had those moments where we're running something on our laptops, laptop closes and work is done, and that's not a good feeling. This allows you to obfuscate that, abstract it out, and again, with sandboxes, you choose where you want to run this. It can be managed by us, it can be in your cloud, you have a lot of different options for what this should look like. So once that foundation is in place, it gives us access to additional capabilities that allows us to build some very robust agents. We can now start thinking about things like compaction, skills, memory, sub-agents, and parallel tool calling as we think about getting these systems in production. Together, they let agents work longer. They are able to allow us to reuse expertise. We're able to learn from prior runs, delegate work, and move faster, which is critically important as we move these systems into production and get to scale. So the value that each of this provides, with compaction, it allows us to take long-running work and keep the thread going effectively so that we're able to fit the context windows. This has major implications from a cost perspective as well, so that we're only pulling in the tokens that we need for the queries that we're making versus pulling in everything forward on every request, and this automatically manages that for us. It also has latency implications because it reduces the number of seconds or milliseconds that a call can be made in. Skills allows us to take reusable expertise and package that up. You can use one-to-many skills in a call that we're making. So for example, we could have an SME skill that is focused on financial modeling. We could have another SME skill that is focused on creating Excel documents and pull those in together when needed. It's a much cleaner way of organizing our work versus stuffing everything into the prompt, which again has implications from a cost and a latency perspective. Memory lets us learn from and benefit from past runs. The goal here is not unlimited recall. We shouldn't be storing everything that's happening. Instead, we should be curating and inspecting the knowledge that helps the agent be more consistent the next time it sees a similar task. So again, going back to why evals are so important, setting up a robust evaluation harness will really help us to decide and determine what memories we want to keep, what memories we should get rid of, and when and how to recall those memories for our use case. Sub-agents are a structured way to delegate work. A lead agent can hand off bounded work that is explicitly set by us to run streams in parallel and then synthesize the result at the end of the run. This works really well when each sub-agent has a clear responsibility and output that it's looking to drive towards. And again, this has really great sort of cost-benefit savings attributes as well as latency attributes as we get to scale, as we get to production. And then the last one here is async parallel tool calling, where we can call multiple tools in parallel. We are able to do the retrievals, the lookups. We're able to separate analysis that can all happen at the same time, bring all of that back, and have the model make sense of what information it needs to process the job that it's doing. The discipline here is to effectively get the evidence that we need, and only what we need, as Brad described in his talk this morning, so that we're not bloating the prompts, we're not using more tokens that we need to run these agents. So the main takeaway here is that an agent is much more than a prompt. It's a system. It has instructions, it has tools, it has skills, task, memory, it has an environment in which it's working. And while the prompt absolutely matters, the harness determines what the agent knows, what it can persist, and how it can safely operate. And that is really what makes the work that can be handled much, much more advanced and way more higher level than what just a simple question-answer assistant is capable of. So let's walk through another demo that shows some of this off. What we have here is a custom tool that we have built for our own internal operations. We'll pick up where we left off the last demo. I have this handoff with some signal that was identified when that initial agent run that came from some business SME. I have my supply command center here that I run internally. It's a custom app that we use with a slew of agents that it has access to. The way this works is we take in the configuration, we define the tools, we govern all of this, and all of this sits within your UI. Within this dashboard, I have a retail availability analyst. It turns out that I had a problem with my inventory. I had way less than I thought I was supposed to have, and so I'm trying to figure out what might have caused that. I'll take the entire thing that I copied from the earlier workspace agent, I'll paste that into the tool that I have built here, and I can start to have some iterative turns on helping me to understand what might be going on. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to go through this as like a back and forth, but you can imagine a world also where this is working in the background autonomously and proactively notifies you that something is going on versus you having to ask it. So here I'm basically asking it to come up with some plausible explanations for why we're seeing this difference in inventory. It will go through internal systems that are vetted by my data science team, that are cataloged and that I can trust. It will go through and it will identify what tools it needs access to. Here, for example, I'm now able to pull in deterministic workflows into this probabilistic environment. So for example, if I need to process something, if I need to get a number of items in an order, I have access to all of those tools in this state. And then what I'm asking it to do here is it identified the issue, it came up with a reason for why that might be the issue and why we might have less inventory. And so what I'm asking it to do now is go ahead and put in a new order for more inventory. And at this stage in the process, I explicitly ask it to pause, ask for approval, so we have a human in the loop, and we define all of this when we set up the agent. I give it its approval, it'll go through, update additional tools, and complete the workflow for me effectively. So the benefits of leveraging the Agents SDK are pretty practical. First and foremost, we're able to deploy agents much faster than we ever were previously. We're able to automatically improve as new model improvements come out, because we don't need to rebuild the system every time new things come out. And the thing that gets me the most excited is that we can now build products that were hard to justify previously, because not every workflow now requires some bespoke orchestration. I can get started very quickly in a very confined way and build products, test, iterate very quickly, and get those products into production in times that just didn't exist previously. Now, once these workflows start to move into production, there's a couple other considerations we need to start thinking through. And they really fall in very similar line with what Brad covered this morning: accuracy, latency, and cost. Accuracy really means the agent has the right context, it uses the right tools, it cites the right evidence, and most importantly, knows when to stop. Latency and cost really comes down to routing. Some work requires something fast and lightweight. Other work deserves much deeper reasoning, government data access, and approvals. And the key thing here is changing any one of these things will implicitly change the others as well. So for that reason, it's really important to start with a clear evaluation set, then use prompting, use better context, and then design a harness that closes the gaps so that we can get to production in the most token efficient way and the most latent efficient way. As we talked about throughout the conversation as well, governance needs to be a part of every step of this process. It needs to be a part of the design. Agents need identity, they need scope, they need access, policy controls, lifecycle management, and audit logs. And enterprises need a control plane, not just a runtime. So as we're building these systems, we need to think through what are the limitations, what do we want the agent to be responsible for, where do we want that line to be drawn, and be explicit about that so that we don't run into issues as we get to production. So the shift here is to go from, again, these question-answer assistants to agents that are acting as true teammates. And it's really not a model decision, but rather a true operating system decision as an organization that we need to decide on. Start with repeatable, high-value work, define the outcomes, the owners, and the evaluation sets, and build on a durable harness. Then match the surface of the job that needs to be done and govern it from day one. For some of these, managed agents are going to be the thing that gets the job done. For others, Codex might be that option. For other use cases, Agents SDK is going to be something more technical will be required. So that's how I would think about and approach that. So I'll leave you with this. We have a saying at OpenAI, with Codex, you can just build things. And now is the time. The tools are here. The models are intelligent. You can just build things. So I encourage you to go build. Thank you so much.